Hello, Brian. Hi, Mike.
I
Hello, Haley. And I know, Haley, you've met Mike before, but let me reintroduce him to anyone who might decide to join this conversation as a recording. Mike Balaban is a friend who spent most of his career on Wall Street, and he's retired from that. And he's struck a vein of gold in at getting people, gay, lesbian, gay men mostly around the world to tell their stories. And so he's connecting thousands of people who actually depend upon, watching or listening to the stories that are being told. So that's wonderful. Mike, tell us a little about that.
well, first of all, I was closeted like all of us until an age, in my case, 24, which was early for the 70s to come out. You came out maybe even earlier, but you were also a pioneer foraging in the wilderness. But I didn't come out in my job because, unlike you, I didn't have the courage to buck. And unlike your husband, I didn't have the courage to buck the conservatism of Wall Street. I also had a gay boss who basically told me, do not ever let anyone know. I made the mistake of mentioning going to the Pines, to Fire Island one weekend when somebody in the trading floor asked me where I was going, thinking there are 18 communities, only 2 of which are LGBTQ. Nobody will know. And we weren't even out to each other, but it was starting to happen. He took me to lunch. He said, don't you ever mention that again. And so
Wow.
he still instilled in me this fear because he was extremely closeted. And, I knew Ray, your husband, who was working in the same firm as me. And I actually knew he was gay because of my boss. And they didn't get along all that well from my boss's perspective because Ray was frightening to him. Ray was bucking the tide. But in any event, I spent 15 years at Lehman Brothers, much of it with your husband, in the closet. I then spent 4 years at Citigroup and ending up running a division for them in Tokyo. And then in 1999, I came back and I left the industry and became a consultant on my own, advising companies about how to go to Asia or Asian companies how to come here, cross-border consulting services. And I ended up, for circumstances, becoming an early businessman focusing on China. And so from 2000 to 2015, my specialty was China, which most of the world didn't even know it was going to become this behemoth that it is now. And it was fascinating. And I went there 6-8 weeks a year, and I kept this flow of business going. But it was costly in terms of energy, flying back and forth and keeping all this whole thing going on my own. I don't speak Chinese. I had to rely on trusted locals who I had worked with and who were my partners. And eventually I left in 2015. And I had nothing to do with the reason you're asking me to speak with you today until then. And then in 2016, something inspired me to start putting up some photos, which I'll describe momentarily, on Instagram, which I didn't even know what it was at the time. I didn't know how to use a hashtag. I had this thing I'd set up and had a motley group of photos with a motley small group of people that were my friends following me. And I said, I'm going to share some of these because, frankly, I had been putting up on Facebook on what's known as Throwback Thursday because they're old photos from the 70s and 80s and 90s. And my gay male friends loved them because a lot of them were guys in Speedos. But I got grumblings from some of my conservative business clients and my family and my lesbian friends, oh, you and your Speedo pics. And it just didn't feel good. You like people to like what you're showing. So I took them down on Facebook. So, well, let me try Instagram. And I put a few up, and lo and behold, instead of the 10 likes that I would normally get on, from the photo of my family or my friends, I got 30 or 50. And Pavlovian conditioning being what it is, I started putting up more and getting more likes and growing my following. And within a year, I had a couple thousand. And I started to take down my family and my friends and make it all gay all the time. And initially I would just put up, 3 sentences on this is so-and-so and me in this location around the world on vacation in this year, and here's what was going on. And that got a lot of traction. But over time, I began to realize, you know what? This is the one place in life where my tendency to be detailed is not penalizing me. I mean, people want me to get to the end of the story. Mike, stop. You're giving too much detail. But there, people like the detail. Why? Most of my followers, I've learned, are in their 20s through 40s. They didn't live back then, but they idealize it. They've nostalgized it, if that's a word, and wish they lived it. Because there are a lot of things about what you and I went through that really are desirable. The simplicity, the naturalness, the meeting in bars in person instead of online, the secret codes that we had to communicate with each other in front of a whole world that didn't realize we were doing it, and the community that came out of it, which is missing now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that drew this audience to. Now, going back, why did I happen to have these photos? Because I always had this preternatural desire to document what was going on in my life so that later on I'd be able to look back visually, not in my mind, and see what I look like. In some cases, naked. I have pictures of me at 25 with no clothes on. I had to send those off to the developer and hope they wouldn't get purloined, right? Because it wasn't supposed to be done. Photos of my friends, photos of my family. I now can look back at every age and see what all of them look like. Most people either weren't taking the photos or did, and they're now stuffed in a shoebox in the garage, and they never organize them. They don't know who's in them, what vacation it was from. I can tell you exactly to the day who was in it, what was going on, and where we were. And I have it.
Why, Mike, why would that be of interest to somebody in Vietnam?
Well, it's in part due to the evocative and nostalgia, even in another country, because frankly, we are, and the message I send out that is grown out of this is, we are a global family. You are part of us, no matter where you are. You may not be able to be open about it because you live in Ghana or Chechnya or Afghanistan, and your life could be at risk, but you are still part of us. And if you can only do it privately on direct messages or comments on my page, follow us, read about us, communicate with us, and be virtually a part of our community. Someday, or maybe sooner in some cases, we'll change the attitudes where you live. And when we can't, not for everyone, unfortunately, there are far too many people in this boat, but for many of you, we'll do what we can to get you out to asylum, to a refugee country. And I've done that with some, and there are organizations doing that. Rainbow Railroad in Toronto got 200 people out of Afghanistan, LGBTQ, out to England since the US abandoned that country. So you are part of our global community. Join us. But if you are a part of this community, there's a responsibility. And so the secondary message I've developed is, number one, you have nothing to be ashamed of, no matter where you are and who you are, even if you have to keep it to yourself. Don't feel guilty. If you haven't hurt anyone, you need to be accepting and ideally proud of who you are. But if you're part of a community, then we need to act like a community. And we are not doing that right now. And the right wing is taking advantage of that by pitting us against each other over pronouns and the use of the word queer versus gay, and all kinds of things. The whole trans issue. I had a message from a very long time close gay male friend, and he's just going on and on about the, he believes in grooming, and he's not Republican. It's like, it's ridiculous. They've turned us into self-haters the way we were back in the 70s. There's just too many of us that are divisive. So I'm trying to send out a message that we need to find similarities, not differences, and focus on them. We need to, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to ask Haley, do you have I'll take a pause and see if you have a question.
I've been taking notes while you've been talking, and I mean, there's a lot of interesting words that you're using here, and I think responsibility and shame are huge words that in my world are very prominent right now too. And I think it's interesting in terms of how you're creating this community, and I would love to hear more about sort of what you consider responsibility, and if you consider those rules, or are they guidelines, or how structured is this community?
Well, it's inchoate and informal. You know, because I am sharing my life, warts and all, I've gained a great deal of credibility as being authentic.
Mm.
And believe me, it's not easy to put up things like, have you paid for sex? I have 3 times, and telling them why and how my views on that changed. You know, and so we discuss all the issues that are talked about but rarely written about. And they range from that to monogamy versus other forms of relationships, to if you've been together for a long time with your partner, do you still sleep in the same room, the same bed? Are you snugglers, or is one of you a heat engine? You have to snuggle for 5 minutes and then separate. So I ask any question that comes to mind about how we live and
Real
how.
life.
Sorry, yeah. And I ask them to weigh in, and I ask them for ideas of themes that they want me to cover. I take polls. I asked, you know, if you're in a long-term relationship, what's the age difference between you and your partner? And I got 200 or 300 replies, and the median age gap was 8.5 years. And I am certain that if I asked that question 30 years ago, it would have been 3 years. You know, there's so many. I had one couple were 43 years apart in age and had been together 25 years. So the way we live and the things that matter to us and how we treat each other are informally talked about, but not really brought to our attention. So I try to do that, and through that to engage them and get them to share their opinions on issues, to ask me their questions. And I've been doing my best recently to try to get people to submit their photos from those years to me, so I can make it not be all about me. And it's very hard, but I'm starting to get traction on that.
Well, Mike inspired me, Haley, to start using Instagram more. And so I have been running a daily series on Instagram, which automatically goes to Facebook, of pictures of Ray and me as a couple, you know, throughout our relationship, and then writing a text about it. And Mike, I don't know how to check comments on Instagram, but on Facebook, I just did a piece that I posted on every site, you know, Gay in 60, Gay in 70, whatever. And it's gotten hundreds of responses overnight. People thanking me for the honesty of describing the steps we went through to be where we are today. But before I go on, Haley, does Mike look like he has a screen in front of him?
It's the light, the sunshine, which I'm like somewhat mesmerized by because it's pretty cool. You can see the like reflection of your face.
This better?
That
Much
is better.
Much better.
It's
Right.
not as mystical, but it's still cool.
Yeah.
Well, I always like being mystical, but I also
I still see the glow. So is Instagram the medium now through which you've built this large audience?
No, I mean, it's how I started, but the Instagram, I have 23,000 followers all over the world, from Laos to Uruguay. I've helped Turkmenistani escape to a country in Europe. I was trying to help a Moroccan who couldn't get a vacation visa to marry an older British boyfriend because no one would let him in, thinking he was going to disappear into the ether. And I have friends in a Mediterranean country whose father was the president of the country, and I was going to get them to give him a vacation visa, go there, marry, go back to Morocco, and then wait for permanent residency in the UK. Unfortunately, his fiance backed off on the
Oh dear.
But the point is, I try to help in whatever way I can. And I try to mobilize other people to help in whatever way I can. And what I was going to say about your Instagram and Facebook, it's up to you. You can keep it all about you, and that's not meant to be judgmental. But you can also expand it and turn around and ask questions to your audience in your post at the end. What similar experiences have you had? If you're in a long-term relationship, I mean, it's up to you if you want to do that. That's what I've done. That's engaged others and made it a two-way kind of community. And I have regulars that are always commenting, people that are coming with ideas. A lot of them don't want to be known and hit me up privately, which, you know, same thing, I guess, on Facebook, they could message you. But it's a very engaging and and vibrant sense of belonging. You know, and allows you to learn about the world, but also to teach the world. So I started out with Instagram. At a certain point, I had a 25-year-old documentarian, and by the way, just as a little bit self-aggrandizing, I guess maybe, I had a 15-year-old follower in the Deep South in an evangelical family say, as someone in my position, there's nothing more encouraging to me in the depressing circumstances in which I live than reading your column every day. It gives me hope. So you get kind of uplifting messages from people that make you feel like there's a value to what you're doing.
And the column, Mike, the column is accompanied by a provocative photo.
Yes, I have to admit, and there is some controversy mildly around it. I use photos, primarily they're called thirst traps. Thirsty photos are those that seek attention from showing off your body. And it's not my body, usually it's others I've taken photos of, sometimes myself when I was 25, sometimes I took a photo of me essentially in the nude last year at 69 3/4 saying, you know, you don't need to age the way you think you do. I mean, it's all in the mind, it's how you live. The point is, don't let the world set your expectations for you. So I use thirst traps to attract eyeballs, and that creates the controversy to the extent that it does among people that say, well, you're setting this body dysmorphia image thing. You're making people feel like they have to look like this in order to be. I said, I'm not extolling the people I put up photos of. I'm not telling you that you need to look like them or that they're my best friends or that all the people I know look like that. They don't. Most of my friends don't look like that. Most of these photos were taken in the 70s and 80s of people that I was attracted to. I didn't know anybody else was ever going to see them. They were for me. So
Mike, I had this, and Haley, jump in, please. I had this experience, Mike, on Facebook. The first piece that I wrote, you know, that you sort of inspired me to do it on a daily basis. The first piece had Ray and me in our late 20s without our shirts on. And yeah, and it got like, you know, 600.
Yeah.
The next one was a picture of me with my brother with his shirt off, you know, 400. Then I kept writing with pictures of Ray and me, you know, arms around each other, 200, you know. So I affirm what you're saying. As soon as the shirtless thing stopped, so did the numbers.
I'll tell you something even more dispiriting. When I put up photos with people of color in them, I'll get a quarter as many likes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't not put up those photos for that reason. I don't have as many to put up, which is a second source of controversy. If you were raised the way I was, I actually grew up in the Deep South and of liberal Northern parents, but I grew up in segregated communities. And when I went to college, I went to an Ivy League school, extremely selective. When I went into training programs at Lehman Brothers and other, extremely selective. Out of 30 or 40 people, you know, in my training program, 1 or 2 would be Black. You know, in Brown, maybe 5% of the acceptance admitted students were Black. Guess what? They were always my best friends. But when you look at my photos, there's a real monochromatic aspect to it. Mm-hmm. And I went to what's called a circuit party, a private pool party in Atlanta during the Hotlanta Weekend Festival in 1991. And there are 200 shirtless, muscular, attractive men, all white. And I get so much crap every time I run this. When I first put them up several years ago, it was just, oh my God, these are, wow. Who knew they did that in 1990? We thought we invented that. No, sorry, they've been doing it since Roman times, you know. But
Haley grew up in a segregated country, Mike. She grew up in Zimbabwe, so she's very familiar, I think, with the different ways people are treated.
I met 4 Zimbabweans, 3 of whom were gay. 1 was a straight woman. All were Jewish. Are you Jewish or not?
No.
Is there a large Jewish community?
There is. Yeah, I mean, it's not massive, but there is a very strong Jewish community there. I think, you know, one of the things that we're talking about is social media and sort of the pros and cons of social media. And I think, Mike, you've highlighted, even though there's social media there and there's all these concerns about screen time and influence and that kind of stuff, it can be used for good. But then we're talking about Thirsty Thursday, thirst traps. And I think we've all experienced the difference between posting a picture of yourself versus a nice picture of a mountain, completely different response.
Yeah.
So I think, in this day and age, when you're trying to, be responsible as well as not be in shame, how do you navigate what to post and how to make sure that you're posting it in a way that is authentic with your message?
Well,
And reflects your values.
let me finish the thirst aspect of it. When I get this pushback about why are you putting up this, you're making me feel bad. My answer is, look, I understand, and I probably have some responsibility contributing to that, but I'm not going to change the world if I stop posting these photos. And in posting them, I get 2 or 3 or 4 times as many people reading this. And I'm really drawing in, not because I want them to see how wonderful I look at 25 or these other guys look now, because half or more of these people are going to read a 400-word narrative that is about something meaningful and substantive that I otherwise wouldn't get them to focus on, and then maybe engage in conversation with me and others about it. So it's a lure. I get it. I acknowledge it. It's a decision I've made. I stand by it. I believe me, I put in photos that aren't thirst traps, but I rely heavily on them, and that's my decision. With respect to the race issue, just to give you an idea, I have a very good Black younger friend who came to me after I got pushback over those photos at that Hot Atlanta party and said, Mike, if you want to take care of these haters, why don't you join me at this weekend, an all-Black LGBT cultural arts festival taking place in Cancun over Memorial Day weekend in 2019. And I did. I joined him as his roommate. And it was a learning experience and an evolution during that 4 days. And I got some hostile reactions at first. I think I won them over and vice versa. The biggest thing I learned, I expected a bunch of hot Black men, to be quite honest with you, just from the kind of image I had. And maybe there were 10 guys out of 300. And by the way, out of 322 people, I was one of 2 whites. And I had a conversation with an assistant basketball coach at Eastern Michigan University, lesbian, about, they'd heard I was coming. They were skeptical about what this white blogger was going to be doing there. And it turns out, I was the board chair of Athlete Ally, which works to make athletes more welcoming and inclusive who are LGBTQ. And she wasn't aware of it. So we talked about that and we bonded. And by the end of it, I was telling her, look, I'm not here to do anything other than to learn and observe and experience. And then to go back and report from a positive perspective what it was that I learned to the people that I represent. And the big issue that came out, it was a kind of a lesson for me. It was half women and half men. You never see a group of 200 or 300 guys, gay men, with more than 1 or 2 women.
Mm-hmm.
The Black group was 50-50. And a lot of them were mothers and nieces and uncles. It was like family, and it was gospel in a way. When you get a large Black group together, it often devolves to this kind of spiritual element. And what I learned was, I asked them, why, how does this work for you? Why aren't we able to do that? And the answer is they belong to 2 minorities, race and sexual orientation. We only are one, sexual orientation. And which one of those 2 do you think they put first? Race, because you can't hide your skin color. You might be able to hide your sexual orientation. So they welcome anybody Black and lesbian or gay in. It doesn't matter. And it was
Mike, the message I've gotten from gay Black people is that it's been much harder in their Black community to be accepted as gay than it is to be accepted as Black. Although, building on the story of racism, when Ray and I lived, over in the townhouse in Fort Lauderdale, which is like 3 miles away, the other person who owned the townhouse was a star player for the Miami Dolphins.
wow.
And when they had parties, it was only the white players who came, and there were no black Patriot players showed up for these sort of drinking and sex.
Were they straight or gay? You didn't mention that.
Oh, well, the football players were all straight.
So why wouldn't the black players show up at a straight?
Well, it's the same as in Atlanta. In Atlanta where we lived, black and whites worked together. But as soon as the bell were out, said,
Right.
you're out of work now, go ahead and play. They went in separate directions.
Well,
Very.
the irony was when I went to the Hotlanta party at which I took photos of 200 white men, I was staying with a black medical resident who I invited to the party, but because of his work schedule couldn't come. Had he come with me, I wouldn't have gotten all that criticism, right? But the point is, we can't make everybody accept everybody. We can't explain everything about what you're doing and how you're doing it to everyone all the time. And you're going to have to deal with criticism. And one of the things I've learned, I went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And whether that's the reason why or not, being involved in international business my whole career, I've had to market and sell to different cultures and languages and races. And I've learned how to be somewhat chameleon-like, but a diplomat. And so in my page, I make sure I never tell anyone they're wrong. I never talk smack at people, no matter how rude they are. I try to engage them. If I have to, I try to move them off the main page to the private page. In the 5 or 10 instances where there are trolls who just want to, create problems, I've blocked them. But that's out of 7 years and thousands of interactions, I'm able to get along. I have Republican friends. I have a transphobic 75-year-old lesbian friend. We have to agree to disagree on the things that she's transphobic. She won't admit it, but she is. I'm not. I want to include everybody. When we get to that subject, let's not talk about this so-and-so, because you and I, there's too much that we have in common. And so Republicans and Democrats need to take a lesson from that. We need to, as a country, talk to each other again and find ways to bridge those gaps.
Haley, you have
I
a question?
I don't really have a question, but I think it's interesting to, like, what keeps coming up is Ricky Gervais has this. He was being interviewed, I think, after the Grammys, where he was eviscerated.
Right.
And one of the things he says is, how arrogant are you to think that you can't be offended and that nobody has the right to offend you? And I think that is, for me, that's one of those things where it's just like, oh my gosh, I wish more people would actually get what he's saying, because I think we have got to a place where so many of us are so arrogant that we think we can't be offended. We think that our way and our opinion is the only way. And if you try and talk to us about that, it immediately goes to defensiveness, which is the shame.
Right.
So I think, is the conversation about responsibility, or is the conversation about shame, or is the conversation about similarities?
And Haley and Mike, I feel that our generation, whatever, from my 75 down to Haley's 32, our generation is being called by evolution to deal with all the isms. That's our job, because the humankind can't move forward, towards love, which is, I think, where we're supposed to be moving towards, without dealing with these isms. And so, as uncomfortable as it is, that's our job. So Mike, when people say, I don't get this, the pronoun thing, I think it's our job to stop and explain it to them. We have a house guest who's straight and a religious brother. And, I spent an hour explaining transgender to him. He wanted to learn, but he was afraid to ask questions. And so I think anytime we have, because I do believe that the transgender issue is going to stall the gay movement until we deal with it. And
I think that we've got a problem. Technology has divided us. The world is becoming balkanized. It's becoming specialized. People don't interact except with their own kind. And the outgrowth of that is not a positive ending. So you're right in terms of trying to break down the barriers and talk to each other. My concern is, I think the biggest problem is the lack of empathy. And fortunately, most people have empathy. When you approach them in the right way and you explain something that they can identify with, that they can relate to. I mean, you can listen to the story of the 39-year-old Ecuadorian trans woman who I interviewed in my podcast series. And if you listen to that as a gay man, for example, and listen to her story about living through 2 wives, a baby mama, and 4 children as a man, miserable and making everyone around him miserable, always realizing deep inside he was she, and finally facing up to that and transitioning through both hormones and reassignment surgery, and now as happy as she's ever been. If you listen to that and don't recognize the similarities between what we went through in the 5 or 10 or 15 years that we stalled in the closet, that we wouldn't accept ourselves, that we finally began to accept ourselves, and then can I tell somebody else, and how do I do that, and who do I tell, and finally owning yourself and being happy in who you are. Can't you see the similarities? But I have gay male friends who don't accept that there's such a thing as body dysmorphia. You know, how can you have that lack of empathy?
Well, I don't know. I don't think you can teach empathy. I think, you know, people, that's a personal journey that a person has to make. But you know, my guess is, Haley, within your community of people who are, have, you know, extrasensory skills, who can see that you gather, because you don't have to fill in the blanks with each other. And right? I mean, that's why
it's, you know, that when we talk about the similarities, you know, that similarity between the gay community, the trans community is a human thing. So those similarities, those themes are mirrored, whether you're straight, whether you're black, whether you're white. There's always this similarity of human growth and learning who we are and how to express ourselves in the most authentic way. And so in my community, which is the spiritual, the energetic, the new age, I kind of am very segregated from that, isolated from that, because I see a lot of that is exclusive. And it mirrors exactly what's happening in the US, where everybody is trying to be so inclusive that they're now exclusive. And you're only a part of this group if you use these words or you see these things. So I tend to keep myself to myself, and, you know, my very small community is a group of people that we see the human first. You know, it doesn't matter what you look like, what you're wearing, what words you're using, as long as you're trying to go for love. That's
right.
my community.
The problem is that that's admirable and desirable, but it is such a small element of the world's population.
I think it starts small though, but I think, you know, my responsibility here is being able to say that it's possible, that I'm actually having a lot of fun. It's not easy to find this little group of people, but when you can find them, you can have an amazing time having these conversations where, you know, you're vegan, I eat meat, yet we can still share a coffee together.
Right. Because you're both interested in the spiritual path.
And if you, not necessarily the spiritual path, we're both interested in seeing each other as humans. We're okay being ruffled. My vegan friend, you know, when we first met, she was ready to give me a lecture about what a contradiction I was because I ate meat and I'm supposed to be a spiritual person. And I was ready to give her a lecture about, well, don't plants have life too?
Uh-huh.
We were ready to go for it, but then we were like, is that really who I am? And again, I don't think that's spiritual. That's a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual mindset.
Yeah, that's where the ego comes in.
We have to be able to really sit with these words like, what does responsibility mean to me? What does shame mean to me? What does trust mean to me? What does authenticity mean to me? And then we have to actually be it. We have to start walking the talk, because so many people in our day are very good at the words, but their actions fall far below the standard of the words.
Right.
Well, I like it if people who say they follow the golden rule only really did, we'd have a much better world.
We'd have a much different world. And I think if we had courage to be able to say, you know, to Uncle Bob at the dinner table, you can't speak like that, and I'm not coming to dinner while you're speaking like that, then we would start seeing change. But I think, you know, in all of us, we have to ask the question, am I being authentic?
Yeah.
Right. It's not okay for Donald Trump to say these things, certainly not okay for Uncle Bob to say them.
I totally support what you're saying, believe in it, and try to live it. My concern is that how do we suffuse society with that, not that message, we're living it. That's not the problem. The problem is there are too many people who I run into and who I learn to get along with and to try to penetrate subtly with these views and values, but they are either selfish. They see the world strictly from their own selfish perspective, whether it be materialism or viewpoints, number one, or they, I don't know, there seems to be, and I'm going to be really maybe unfair here, it seems to me it's a problem within the Republican Party that in the US, that too many people that I know see the world in blacks and whites, no nuance, no grays. And the problem is everything is more complex than that. It's much easier if you see the world as either or, good or bad, and that's how they turn the world against trans or groomers or whatever. They've categorized it, and they don't have the capacity or the willingness, at least, to understand the humanness of the intermediate area. So that's the problem I have. How do you break through these people who put things into these either ors and make them see that life is really complicated and lots of middle ground, and lots of the issues you're talking about aren't so cut and dry?
I think you do it by role modeling. You know, every action that we take, somebody's watching. You know, somebody is, and they think about it. You know, they think about, why did he do that? You know, and why don't I do that? I mean, we were at dinner at Rosie's. Mike knows Rosie's, and I think you do too, Haley. It's a great restaurant nearby. And I watched the hostess when one group left. I watched her pour equal amounts of water in the drinks that were left so she could stack them, right? And they wouldn't overflow, and then stick a napkin in the top to absorb the water. And so when we got up to leave our table, I did the same. You know, I took our 3 glasses and poured them and put the napkin in. And when I left, I said to her, I watched you do it and I did that. And she said, how many people would do that? And I said, well, I don't know, but you know, I think it's the right thing to do. You know, it's the right thing to ask the person in the grocery store who's stacking the shelves, how are you today? You know, and if they say I'm having a hard time, give them a hug. You know, if we, Mike, you talked about the golden rule, and every religion really is about that. You know, love is where we're going. Love yourself, love your neighbor. You know, love is really, Haley, you agree with that. And when we manifest love without lecturing people, when we manifest love in our behaviors, I think it helps people move forward. You know, Mike, one of the things you might do, and you may have already done this, but put a picture up of a transsexual male with a hairy chest and beard and incredible pecs and 6-pack, and tell a story, but don't wait till the very last line to say, and Joe is transsexual, because you're still going to get your, what do you call it, thirst trap. But because the transsexual men that I know are generally really hot. I mean, they've worked on it, and far more than I have. And you know, putting a picture up, you're going to cause a person suddenly thinks, wait a second, you know, that person looks like that. Could I have sex with a person who looks like that? Right? And it's an important question. At sex camp.
The problem is, you know, we can go down that rat hole for a long time because I've thought through that. And the short answer is, if I met someone and got to know them and they were a transsexual, trans man, as much as I, as a gay man, am not particularly comfortable with the female anatomy. I mean, I've been to bed with women, but I'm drawn to men for being men. And yet a trans man has parts of himself that still, depending on prosthesis and all that, that still may be female. If I'm a demisexual, you know what that is?
No, please.
It's a person who has sex with everybody.
I don't like the name. It's developed at an asexual convention. It means halfway between being asexual and like everybody else. And that is that we are, and the the code word. I jokingly say I'm like a lesbian in a gay man's body. We need an emotional attachment, a connection in order to be aroused.
Mhm.
Men in general, and gay men especially, have over time learned how to segregate, situationally at least, transactional sex from romantic sex. I'm horny, I've got testosterone flowing me, there's nobody, nobody around to date, and this person's available, I'm going to go screw her, him, whatever. I can't do that. If I don't feel something, I am not going to. So what I've decided as a demisexual, that if I got to know someone who was a trans man and to emotionally feel connected to him, irrespective of my perhaps discomfort over physical genitalia, etc., I'd go there, because it would be about the person. And, we have someone involved with Stonewall, the National Museum that you and I have both been involved with. And I won't tell the full story, except that she was a straight woman who became a lesbian, who then met a woman who she married, who then realized that he was truly a guy and went through a transition, became a trans man. And the woman stayed married to the trans man, and all of her lesbian friends are like, why aren't you divorcing? You're a lesbian. You should be with women. I fell in love with him. I'm sorry, I can't. That's who I am. So that's who I would be. But not everybody's like that. There are people who see the world in blacks and whites, and they would say, I can't do that. I'm not interested. I don't believe in it. Blah, blah, blah.
Okay, well, that's the choice they make. And, I think we create our own nightmares and our own heaven. And, the people who say, no, Mike, you have the experience of heaven now because you're open. You see beauty around you, and you've learned that the beauty is multiplied when there's emotion involved in it. If they haven't, and they can't get it from you, then they're never going to have the experience.
Right.
And sometimes we have to just let go and say, this is your journey. I hope you make it. But
Very true. I think that's the humility of being a human, is that we have to realize my only responsibility here is myself. I need to make sure.
Set an example through your own.
Yeah, like I can only help other people change if I'm walking the talk, if I'm being authentic, and if I've gone through that experience and I can speak from experience. So when other people aren't at that same place, that same stop sign that I'm at, and I want to try and not go into sort of the very stereotypical language, but if they're not at that same intersection that I'm at, it's not for me to kind of say everybody has to come to my intersection, because I can't move now until everybody's here.
That's why I'm, so pleased with the fact that I've attracted through these photos and then these messages a community, an audience that allows me to magnify the message through the way I interact with people, through the messages I put out, that hopefully are reaching more people, and that they in turn will reach others. Who knows? We can't worry about it. You just do what feels right.
I think we have to do what feels good and go with it, and trust the timing. Trust that, when people are meant to receive the message, they get the message. And to your point, Brian, if we are able to be an inspiration, and for some reason that plants a seed, and 5 years later, they're like, there was this one guy, Brian, who kind of felt like I knew what he was talking about. I'm going to reach out to him now. Yeah. And I don't know if you've experienced that, Mike, but I'm sure you have, where people, you think they should have been something, whether it's just a learning moment, and nothing happens. And then 3 years later, they reach out, and you're just like, oh, I did plant a seed.
A delayed reaction.
Yeah. And I think, that's where it's so important for us to be authentic, because we never know when we're planting that seed, and we never know what seed we're planting.
Correct. So to answer your earlier question about Instagram being the core of it or not, it was. But then I had a 25-year-old documentarian who followed me and loved what I was doing, reach out and said, I'd love to collaborate. Are you willing to explore? Sure. He thought a documentary would be perfect, but he didn't have a budget. about a podcast. Okay. I didn't know anything about podcasts. I don't think I'd ever listened to one. We began doing it, and ultimately his job made it impossible for him to continue with me. But we interviewed each other across a 40-year age gap. And he was girly, to put it in his words, when he was growing up, and got told that he was gay all his life, even though he didn't think he was. I was a, masculine presenting, jock oriented, hiding my true attraction to boys my whole life. The whole world told me I was straight, and I feared I was gay, and we end up at the same place. And so that started my podcast, which now I do alone. He chose the name Bammer and me being the guest. And even though he's no longer there, I kept the name. And I interviewed some remarkable and extraordinary people from Kyrgyzstan and Somalia and, Ecuador and Australia. Half of them are known: David Mixter, Andy Tobias, Kevin Jennings, leaders in the LGBT community. Half no one has ever heard of, and their stories wouldn't be known if they didn't share it on my podcast. And the idea is to reach people through those stories with different types of people. And then that led me to, next I created a Twitter feed. When Instagram started deleting my photos, and by the way, don't get me started about homophobia and misogyny on Instagram and Facebook. I could show you some really rude pictures of women that are up, and I complained about it just as a test, and they came back and said it doesn't violate our standards.
Well, I just wanted to dig there, as long as they're good-looking women, because if a plus-size woman does exactly the same photo, that gets taken down too.
You're right. And the same thing, anything that's gay looking or acting with the photos, but straight Instagram influencer fitness instructors can show pubic hair, butt cracks, etc., and they stay up.
Mm-hmm.
Being what it is, I created a Twitter where I put some of the racier photos. And what I'll do is say, go to my Twitter to see what I would have posted here. And on Twitter, go to my Instagram to read the narrative that accompanies this photo. And so I've done that for a year. I've got about 3,000 followers there. And then I started a YouTube channel where I do 10 to 15 minute videos. And I call them either Bammer Talks or Bammer Tales. Talks are topical discussions on monogamy versus this, or racism, or what have you. And the tales are stories from my life with lessons associated with them. And so I do these videos right here. There's my, studio. I record them, I put them up, and I've got a community of people following me there. And now I've just started a TikTok, and I created a website called Bammer.co, where we ask for submissions. We have 200 stories from LGBTQ people around the world, and they come from all over. And we edit them, and we put them up, and they share moments from their lives. So again, our whole motto is creating community through storytelling and the sharing of experiences. And if you
Mike,
yeah,
what religion did you grow up in?
I have a Jewish upbringing, but they were unreligious parents and an entirely Christian, Southern conservative evangelical community. I was bar mitzvah for my grandfather's sake. I didn't know what I was spouting. I don't go to a church. I'm spiritual, and I believe in the golden rule.
So I was going to ask you, how does your spirituality impact your work?
I truly believe that just treat everybody the way you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go to any religious services unless I'm guests of other people. I'm open to all religions. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I just try to live it and behave it and set a model,
Yeah. Our guest is very educated on all the different religions, and he wants me to understand where things are coming from. Where did that? And I said, Rod, imagine a great big banquet table that had all kinds of different foods, and you and I pick some food and it's delicious. I don't care what the religion of the person who made it is. If I love it, then I love it. So if Jesus says something that I really relate to, I hold on to it, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to hold on to everything. If Buddha says something, oh, that tastes good, I'm going to take some of that. I don't need to know everything about Buddhism. I don't need to know how it may conflict with Hinduism. I don't need to know that. It just
And I
tastes
don't
good.
care what somebody's religion is as long as they live it. You know,
Yeah.
as long as they truly represent the ideals that all religions put forward, which we've already discussed, right? So I could care less whether you're Buddhist or Shinto or, you know, Christian or Jewish or Muslim. I mean, they're all fine. You know, I don't like the more drastic parts of militant Islam. But if you really go back and read the Quran, from what I understand, it's not as homophobic or as exclusive.
The
as,
Quran is exactly the same as the Bible. It's just in a different language. I studied the Quran and I have a copy of the Quran here, and it's the same language. Well, not language, different language, same words, same concepts. If you look at Hinduism, Buddhism, it's all how to be a good person, how to find yourself, how to be the example. And I think, you know, we have found ourselves as humans in a time, in a place where we don't like to be wrong. So I think, you know, in all levels of that, there's extremism.
And unfortunately, the internet and technology tend to isolate us and draw us into channels with each other and not with others. And
well, I think we have to make the choice, you know, we all make the choice to go into those places. And we, you know, I think at least, and what I see is that we have to start all being responsible and accountable for our choices, for our decisions, for our actions, for our words to be able to come out of that.
there's the good side of social media and the internet and the
Yeah.
bad side. And I try to minimize the bad side, as I said, by behaving in an accepting and inclusive and non-judgmental way, and hoping that that sets an example. But the upside for me has been much more beneficial. The people I would never have met from Laos or Kyrgyzstan or Ecuador who find me. People
I
that
think that's really important. And we have 4 minutes left, so I just want to sort of end on Mo Gadot, I believe. He used to work at Google and was sort of back when Google was starting all the AI, he was fundamental in the AI, and he actually left to create 1 billion happy people, which is, to your point, you know, getting people to use the social media from a place of a purer intention, because that's what's needed to even out the algorithms and the actual AI, which we're definitely going into now. So I think, you know, the more of us that push ourselves into using social media, but using it consciously, using it for the wonderful intentions, I think the better we're all going to be. And I think that is part of us creating the heaven.
And I think that creating a role model for that, because a lot of people learn social media from their peers and they're not taught, you know, about how to use it lovingly. They learn how to use it and then they jump into it. And I don't worry about this generation. You know, everyone says, oh, this generation doesn't take their eyes off the phone. So what? You know, we have the hula hoop. I mean, you have things that the next over generation says, oh my God, they're lost. These guys, they're going to figure it out. But we can have some influence while we're still around on hoping that their messages are uplifting. You know, I tell people that my Facebook page is my treehouse. And, you know, here are the rules. And if you don't want to abide by the rules, you're out, right? And the other people really like that. They like knowing that they can post and not have somebody be snarky with them, you know, in their response, because as soon as the person gets snarky, out they go.
Well, gentlemen, it has been a wonderful morning with you. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. And I think it was a very colorful conversation.
Yeah, Mike has a lot more to share. You know, he's and you are a detailed person, Mike, but I loved having you. It's been great. And I think you're a really good man, really good soul. So
likewise.
Yeah. Thanks.
This
I
is
love you all.
And if you
Bye-bye.
if you want some help on the technical stuff with your Instagram, let me know.
I will. Thanks a lot.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.